Millionaire bachelor fell in love when he saw an employee feeding his daughter as if she were. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The last rays of sunlight tinged the windows of the imposing penthouse in New York's business center Golden. Michael Davis observed the city at his feet, an untouched glass of whiskey in his hands. The glass reflected the image of a 42-year-old man, impeccably dressed in an Italian suit, with graying hair at his temples that gave him an air of distinction. But his brown eyes carried a melancholy that no professional success could disguise. His phone vibrated for the 10th time that hour, another message from the housekeeper. "Sophie is crying again, Mr. Davis. She won't sleep without you." The message made his heart tighten. His 6-year-old daughter, so small and already carrying an absence greater than herself, needed him. But how could he be present when he himself felt so lost? Michael left the glass on the glass table and walked through the silent hallway to his daughter's room. The walls, painted in a delicate shade of pink, contrasted with the sobriety of the rest of the apartment. Sophie was curled up in bed, hugging her favorite stuffed rabbit, her eyes red from crying. "Daddy," she murmured, stretching her little arms toward him. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, trying to ignore the lump in his throat as he looked at the little face so similar to Helen's, his late wife. "I'm here, Princess," he whispered, stroking the girl's brown hair. "Why don't you want to sleep?" "I had a dream about Mommy," Sophie replied, her voice breaking. "She was smiling, Dad, but when I woke up, she wasn't here anymore." Michael took a deep breath, fighting against his own tears. How do you explain to a child that some absences have no explanation? How do you fill a void that seemed to grow every day? "Mommy will always be with you, Sophie." Here, he gently touched his daughter's chest. "In your heart." The girl sniffled, nestling closer to him. "But I wanted her for real, Dad. I wanted to be able to hug her." Those words hit him like punches. For 2 years since Helen had left them, Michael had immersed himself in work, as if he could find some meaning to continue there. Digitech, his technology company, had expanded dramatically under his obsessive leadership. But while building larger empires, his daughter grew up alone, surrounded by nannies and housekeepers who took turns in shifts. "Tomorrow I'll take you to see a special place," he promised, surprising himself with the words. Her place where other children play and learn together. Sophie's eyes lit up slightly. "Really, Dad, will you really?" "Yes, Princess. I'll reschedule my morning meetings." Sophie finally smiled, a small but genuine smile that made something inside him stir. When was the last time he had seen his daughter truly happy? Michael stayed there, humming softly an old lullaby that Helen used to sing, until Sophie fell asleep. He watched her serene little face in sleep and felt a determination grow inside him. He needed to do something different for her, for them. Back in the living room, he picked up the phone and called his assistant. "Claire, I need you to reschedule all of tomorrow morning's appointments. Yes, including the video conference with the Chinese investors. No, it's not an emergency. It's a priority." He hung up before she could protest and approached the window again. The city was now dotted with lights, like earthly stars shining in the darkness. Somewhere down there, he thought, there must be something more than this loneliness disguised. As success, something more than endless meetings and empty nights. "Helen," he murmured to the glass that reflected his own lonely image, "how do I go on without you? How do I be the father our daughter deserves?" Silence was his only answer, but this time, instead of surrendering to it, Michael began to plan the next day. For the first time in a long time, he felt he needed to change. He didn't know how. He didn't know where, but he knew he needed to try. For Sophie, and maybe, just maybe, for himself too. The next morning, Laura Mitchell arrived early at the Rainbow Institute, as she had done every day for 5 years. The simple building in Eastern New York was already busy, with children arriving for another day of activities. As she organized the materials for the first workshop of the day, her thoughts drifted to the letter she had received the night before, an opportunity for a master's degree in early childhood education in England, with a full scholarship. Etienne? had been her dream since she began working with children, a chance to expand her horizons and perhaps heal old wounds. But how could she leave behind everything she had built? How could she abandon the children who somehow filled the void left by her younger brothers? Premature departure. A different commotion in the hallway pulled her from her thoughts. A little girl of about 6, dressed in an impeccable school uniform, was crying copiously, while a tall man in a navy blue suit tried to calm her unsuccessfully. Sophie. "Princess, please." The man seemed completely lost, alternating between trying to console the girl and checking urgent messages on his phone. Laura approached instinctively, years of experience guiding her steps. "Hello," she greeted with a gentle smile. "Can I help?" The man raised his eyes, visibly relieved to see someone willing to assist. Laura noticed the weariness on his face, despite his elegant appearance. "Sophie is a little nervous," he explained, running his hand through the grey hair at his temples. "It's our first time here and I don't want to stay," the girl sobbed. "I want to go home." Laura crouched down to Sophie's height, her face soft and understanding. "You know, Sophie, I have something very special to show you. Do you like to draw?" The girl sniffled, her red eyes showing hesitant interest. Laura pulled a small notepad and some colored pencils from her pocket. "Did you know that we have a magic window here?" Laura continued, her voice low as if sharing a secret. "During the day, if you look through it while drawing, you can see special constellations, but only very brave girls can see them." Sophie stopped crying, intrigued. "Constellations? Like stars?" "Exactly." Laura smiled, extending the materials to her. "How about we try to find them together?" The father watched the interaction with a mixture of surprise and fascination. Laura could feel his gaze, but she kept focused on Sophie, who was already starting to calm down. "I'm hungry," the girl murmured timidly. Laura opened her bag and took out a sandwich wrapped in paper. "Luckily, I always bring an extra snack. Can we share it while we look for the stars?" Sophie nodded, a small smile appearing on her lips. Laura gently wiped the tears from the girl's face with a tissue, a gesture so natural it seemed she had been doing it all her life. "Mr. She looked questioningly at the father. "Davis." "Michael Davis," he replied, his voice softer now. "And I don't know how to thank you." "Laura Mitchell," she introduced herself. "And you don't need to thank me. It's what we do here at the Institute. Create safe spaces for children to be who they are." Michael watched as Laura led Sophie to a table near the window, animatedly explaining about the imaginary constellations. His daughter, who minutes before was inconsolable, now laughed at the stories Laura invented, her eyes shining with a joy he hadn't seen in a long time. "Daddy, come see," Sophie called, waving enthusiastically. "Laura is showing me the jumping rabbit constellation." Michael approached, sitting awkwardly in the small chair next to his daughter. Laura continued her magical narrative, but for a moment their eyes met. There was something there, a silent understanding, as if they both understood that this casual encounter could mean much more than it appeared. "Can you see the special stars too, Mr. Davis?" Laura asked with a playful smile, breaking the moment. Michael laughed for the first time in a long time. "I think I need more practice," he replied, surprising himself with the ease with which the words came out. In the weeks that followed, the Rainbow Institute became an essential part of Sophie and Michael's routine. What began as a desperate visit transformed into something deeper. Michael began to reorganize his afternoons, delegating meetings and surprising his team with early departures from the office. Laura observed the silent transformation of that family. Sophie, once shy and tearful, now ran through the Institute's corridors with contagious energy, always carrying new drawings of her special constellations. But it was the change in Michael that most caught her attention. On a particularly busy afternoon, while the children participated in a painting workshop, Michael arrived earlier than usual. Laura found him standing in the hallway, watching Sophie through the activity room window. The girl was laughing, her face stained with colorful paint, completely absorbed in her art. "She's different," Michael commented, feeling Laura approach. "Lighter, more childlike." Laura smiled, stopping beside him. Children have this incredible ability to recover, to find joy even in the most difficult moments. Sometimes they just need space and time for that. And special people who know how to guide them, he added, glancing at her sideways. The comment made Laura blush slightly. In recent days, she had found herself thinking more than normal about that lonely father and his daughter. There was something in Michael's vulnerability, hidden beneath the facade of a successful businessman, that touched a sensitive chord in her heart. "Mr. Davis," she began. "Michael," he gently interrupted her. "After all these afternoons, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Michael," Laura corrected, a small smile on her lips. "I wanted to show you something." She led him to her office, a small but cozy room filled with children's books and colorful drawings on the walls. From a folder, she pulled out several drawings made by Sophie. "I've been keeping these," she explained, spreading the papers on the table. "I noticed an interesting progression in them." Michael examined the drawings, his expression softening. The first ones were dark, with heavy lines and isolated figures. But gradually, colors started appearing. The latest showed 3 figures, holding hands under a starry sky. "This is from today," Laura gently pointed out. "She drew you, her, and me." Michael touched the drawing with trembling fingers. "Sophie talks a lot about you at home," he admitted. "Last night she asked me if you could come have dinner with us sometime." Laura felt her heart race. "Michael, You don't need to answer now," he hastened to say. "I know it's a delicate situation. I'm a single father. You're her teacher." But a joyful shout interrupted them. Sophie was at the door, her little hands still dirty with paint. "Laura! Daddy! Look what I made!" She ran to them, holding a new drawing. It was a large golden star, surrounded by small hearts. "It's the constellation of love," she proudly announced. "Only special people can see it." Laura felt tears forming in her eyes. That child, without knowing, was breaking all her carefully constructed defenses. She remembered the letter from England, still unanswered in her drawer. "It's beautiful. Sophie," she managed to say, her voice slightly choked. Michael watched the interaction with a mixture of emotions in his gaze. There was gratitude, affection, and something more. Something neither of them was ready to name. "Laura," Sophie called, her voice suddenly serious. "Will you stay with us forever?" The innocent question hung in the air like a soap bubble, delicate and frightening. Laura looked at Michael, who seemed equally unprepared for that moment. "Sophie, dear," he began, but his daughter wasn't finished. "Because I would really like that," the girl continued, her eyes shining with hope. "You make Daddy smile. And when he smiles, it seems like the sun shines brighter." Laura spent the night sleepless, tossing and turning in her bed in her small apartment in eastern New York. Sophie's words echoed in her mind, mixing with memories of the past. She got up before dawn and went to the old wooden chest she kept in the corner of the room. With trembling hands, she opened it and took out a photograph yellowed by time. In it, a teenager smiled, hair tousled and eyes full of dreams. Lucas, her younger brother, eternally frozen at 16 in that image. "What would you tell me now, little brother?" she whispered to the photo. "How do I know when it's time to risk again?" The sun was beginning to rise when Laura finally made a decision. She took the letter from England and reread the terms of the scholarship. A unique opportunity, they said. The chance to realize the academic dream she had abandoned to raise her brother after her parents' departure. At the institute, that morning seemed especially busy. Laura tried to concentrate on her activities, but her thoughts kept returning to Michael and Sophie. How could she explain to them about the possibility of her departure? "Laura?" Mrs. Marlene's voice, the institute's coordinator, brought her back to reality. "Do you have a moment?" In her office, Mrs. Marlene seemed concerned. "Dear, we need to talk about something delicate. This came to my email today. It was an article from a business gossip blog. The title made Laura freeze. Technology billionaire involved with employee of charitable institute. Real interest or gold digging?" "This is ridiculous," Laura exclaimed, feeling her face burn. There's nothing between... I know, dear, Mrs. Marlene gently interrupted her, but you know how these things work. Michael Davis is a public figure. Every step he takes is watched. Laura felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had been naive to think there could be something simple in that situation. Her mind went back to Lucas, to how she had promised herself never to get involved in situations that could hurt her again. Maybe, she began, her voice trembling slightly, maybe it's better for me to step back a little. I can ask another educator to accompany Sophie. Mrs. Marlene took her hands in hers. Laura, I've worked with children for 40 years. What I've seen happen in this institute in the last few weeks has been magical. That girl has blossomed under your care. And Michael, well, I've never seen a man so transformed. Laura felt silent tears running down her face. But what if the blogs are right? What if I'm deluding myself? I can't risk Sophie's well-being. Fear is natural, dear, but don't let it define your choices. You've already lost too much by hiding from it. The rest of the day passed like a blur. Laura avoided the time when Michael usually picked up Sophie, asking a colleague to do it instead. At night, alone in her apartment, she picked up the England letter again. The deadline for response was at the end of that week. Her phone rang, making her start. It was a message from Michael. We missed you today. Sophie said the special stars didn't shine as much without you. Laura held the phone against her chest, feeling her heart beat erratically. How could someone she had known for such a short time affect her feelings so much? How had a little girl managed to bring down all the walls she had built around her heart? She looked again at the photo of Lucas. Her brother always said she had the terrible habit of giving up before even trying, of protecting herself so much that she ended up getting hurt more. What do I do, Lou? She murmured to the photograph. How do I know if it's worth the risk? At that moment, her phone vibrated again. It was another message from Michael, this time with an attached photo. Sophie sleeping, hugging the scarf Laura had forgotten at the institute weeks ago. She said this way she can dream of you, the message said. And I confess that I have been dreaming too. Michael stared at the notebook screen without really seeing the financial spreadsheet numbers in front of him. The Digitech office, normally his refuge, seemed suffocating that morning. Laura hadn't appeared at the institute for 3 days straight, and her messages received only polite and distant replies. Mr. Davis? Claire, his assistant, interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Rebecca Allen is here. She said it's urgent. Michael felt a tightness in his chest. Rebecca, Helen's mother, his late wife, rarely appeared without warning. When she did, it was usually not for good reasons. Send her in, he replied, adjusting his tie in a nervous gesture. Rebecca entered like a blast of cold wind, her high heels echoing on the marble floor. Elegant at 60, she carried on her face an expression of disapproval that Michael knew well. So it's true, she began without preamble, throwing a magazine on his desk. On the cover, a photo of him and Laura at the institute, Sophie between them. You are really replacing my daughter with a NGO employee? Rebecca, it's not like that at all. Michael tried to stay calm. Laura is a dedicated educator who has been helping Sophie. Sophie needs her mother's memory, Rebecca interrupted him, her voice trembling with indignation. Not some random substitute you found in a moment of neediness. The words hit Michael like slaps. Don't you dare, he said, his voice dangerously low, diminish what Laura means to Sophie. Your granddaughter is smiling again, is living again. That doesn't mean we're erasing Helen. Rebecca let herself fall into a chair, tears shining in her eyes. You promised, Michael. You promised you would keep her memory alive. And I do, he replied softly. Every day when I look at Sophie and see Helen's eyes, when I tell stories about her mother before bedtime. But Rebecca, I can't live only on memories, and Sophie needs more than photographs on the wall. Heavy silence fell over the office. Rebecca took a handkerchief from her purse, discreetly drying her eyes. Have you ever considered, she finally spoke, her voice more controlled, that perhaps this young woman is only interested in your money? In your position. Michael felt a wave of irritation. Laura didn't even know who I was when we met. And if you knew her... But I don't, Rebecca cut him off, and I don't want to know her. I just came to warn you that I won't allow my daughter's memory to be tarnished by an inappropriate romance. She stood up, adjusting her impeccable blazer. Think carefully about what you're doing, Michael. Some choices don't have a way back. After Rebecca left, Michael remained motionless for long minutes. His mind went back to the first time he saw Laura, how she managed to calm Sophie so naturally. He thought of all the afternoons they spent together at the Institute, the invented stories, the shared smiles. He picked up his phone and reread Laura's last message. I need time to think. Please understand. There was something else going on, he could feel it. Something beyond magazine gossip or Rebecca's accusations. The intercom rang, bringing him back to reality. Mr. Davis, Sophie's school is calling. Michael frowned. It wasn't time for classes to end. Put them through. Mr. Davis, the coordinator's voice sounded concerned. Sophie has a high fever. We tried all the emergency numbers, but no one answered. Can you come pick her up? Michael was already on his feet, grabbing his jacket. I'm on my way. Is she okay? Is she with someone? Yes, she's in the infirmary. And, well, Miss Laura is with her. Michael stopped mid-movement. Laura? Yes, Sophie asked for her a lot. As we knew she works at the Institute, we contacted her. She arrived in minutes. Something inside Michael's chest warmed and tightened at the same time. Even while distancing herself, even with all the conflicts, Laura didn't hesitate to run to Sophie when she needed her. Tell them I'm on my way, he replied, already heading to the elevator. Rebecca's words still echoed in his mind, but now they seemed distant, like a nightmare that loses strength with the light of day. On the way to the school, a certainty began to form in his heart. Some people enter our lives not to replace absences, but to teach us that love can take many forms. And that sometimes the best way to honor those who have left is to allow ourselves to live again. Laura held Sophie's small, warm hand in the school infirmary, her heart divided between concern for the girl and anxiety about the imminent encounter. With Michael, the fever had gone down a little, but Sophie was still weak, her normally lively eyes now dull with discomfort. Tell me another star story, Sophie asked in a weak voice, squeezing Laura's hand. Of course, my love, Laura replied, softly adjusting the girl's damp hair. Do you know the story of the guardian star? Sophie shook her head, nestling closer. Well, they say there's a special star in the sky that takes care of all the people we love. Even when we can't see it, it's there, shining and protecting. Like, Mommy? Sophie asked softly. Laura felt her heart tighten. Yes, dear, exactly like your mommy. And will you become a guardian star too? The innocent question caught Laura by surprise. Juliana from my class said you're going far away. Laura swallowed hard. The children at the Institute must have overheard some conversation about the scholarship. Sophie, I don't want you to go, the girl stated, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Please, Laura, stay with us. At that moment, the infirmary door opened and Michael entered, looking worried and relieved at the same time. Their gazes met for an instant, loaded with unspoken emotions. Daddy, Sophie called, her voice more animated despite the weakness. Michael approached quickly, sitting on the other side of the bed. Hey, princess, how are you feeling? Laura is telling me a star story, Sophie replied, still firmly holding Laura's hand. Dad, tell her not to go away. Michael looked questioningly at Laura, who felt her cheeks burning. I really need to talk to you both, she admitted, but not now. Sophie needs to rest. The fever has gone down a bit, the nurse intervened, approaching with a glass of water and medication. But she needs to go home and be under observation. Michael nodded, carefully picking Sophie up. The girl protested weakly. Is Laura coming with us? Laura hesitated, her heart beating fast. The England letter weighed in her bag like lead, the deadline inexorably approaching. Mrs. Marlene's words about gossip and the judging looks she had received in recent days haunted her. Please, Sophie insisted, her voice sleepy. I want the two people I love most with me. Michael and Laura exchanged looks again, a silent conversation happening between them. There were so many things to be said, so many fears and hopes intertwined. "Come with us," Michael finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. "We need to talk, and Sophie will be more at ease with you nearby." Laura knew this was a decisive moment. She could feel the weight of the choice she would need to make. England represented safety, an escape to her academic dreams, away from emotional complications and malicious gossip. But there, looking at the sleepy Sophie in her father's arms, and at Michael with his eyes that seemed to see through all her defenses, she wondered if running away was really the answer. "All right," she agreed, picking up her bag. The England letter seemed to burn through the fabric, reminding her that some decisions cannot be postponed indefinitely. As they headed to Michael's car, Laura thought of her brother Lucas, how he always said that true love requires courage. Not the courage of fairy tales, but real courage, the one that makes us face our fears and risk our hearts. "You drive," Michael said, handing her the keys while accommodating Sophie in the back seat. "I need to stay with her." That small gesture of trust made something stir inside Laura. Maybe, just maybe, some love stories needed to begin with an act of faith. The journey to the Davis penthouse was made in a silence loaded with unspoken words. Laura drove carefully, occasionally glancing through the rearview mirror, where Michael cradled sleeping Sophie. The city around seemed a blur, as if the whole world was reduced to that moment. That car, those three people united by bonds none of them had planned. Upon arrival, Michael carried Sophie to her room while Laura waited in the living room, her eyes wandering over the details of the apartment that revealed so much about its inhabitants. Photos of Helen smiling decorated one of the walls, creating a silent narrative of happy moments frozen in time. "She's sleeping now," Michael announced softly, returning to the living room. "The fever has gone down a bit more." Laura nodded, suddenly feeling nervous. "Michael, Wait," he gently interrupted her. "There's something I need to show you first." He crossed the room and opened a drawer, taking out a small leather-bound book. "I found this last week when I was organizing some old things." Laura watched as he leafed through the book with reverent care. "It's Helen's diary," he explained, his voice breaking. "I never had the courage to read it before, but after everything that's happening..." He stopped at a specific page and began to read. "Dear Diary, today Sophie asked about angels. She said she wanted to know if they can take care of people even without wings. I replied that yes, sometimes angels come disguised as normal people, bringing light when everything seems dark. If something happens to me, I hope my family finds their own guardian angels. That Michael doesn't close himself off to love. That Sophie grows up knowing there are different ways to love, and that they are all equally true." Laura felt silent tears running down her face. Michael gently closed the diary, his own eyes shining with emotion. "For a long time," he continued, "I thought honoring Helen's memory meant living in the past. But now I understand that she wanted exactly the opposite." "Michael, there's something you need to know," Laura spoke, gathering courage. She took the England letter from her bag and handed it to him. "I received this a few weeks ago." He read the document in silence, his expression subtly changing. "A scholarship. It's an incredible opportunity." "It's what I've always dreamed of," Laura admitted. "But now I don't know what I want anymore," she completed, her voice almost a whisper. "Or rather, I know exactly what I want, and that scares me more than anything." Michael moved closer, sitting beside her on the sofa. "What scares you, Laura?" "Everything," she replied with a contained sob. "The gossip, the looks, the accusations that I'm here for your money. Your mother-in-law hates me without even knowing me, and mainly, I'm afraid of giving myself to this and then losing everything again," she completed, finally letting the tears fall freely. "Like I lost my parents, like I lost my brother. I'm so afraid of loving and seeing everything crumble once more." Michael took her hands in his touch gentle and firm at the same time. "You know what I learned after Helen left, that the fear of losing cannot be greater than the courage to live. I spent 2 years hiding behind work, trying to protect my heart, But I wasn't protecting anything, I was just failing to live. Laura looked at their intertwined hands, feeling the comforting warmth of his touch. Sophie is so much like Lucas, she murmured. The same curiosity for details, the same sparkle in her eyes when she discovers something new. Sometimes, when I'm with her, it's as if a part of him is alive again. Perhaps that's the true miracle of love, Michael reflected. It doesn't replace those we've lost, but it helps us find new reasons to smile, to believe, to move forward. A noise coming from Sophie's room made them get up quickly. The girl was having a nightmare, calling for Mommy in her restless sleep. Laura and Michael rushed there, each taking a side of the bed automatically, as if they had done this all their lives. Laura hummed softly while stroking Sophie's hair, who gradually calmed down in her sleep. Michael watched the scene with a tight heart, remembering how Helen used to do the same when their daughter had nightmares. "She's more peaceful now," Laura whispered, adjusting the blanket over Sophie. They returned to the living room in silence, but something had changed in the air between them. It was as if that shared moment had broken down the last barriers that separated them. "How much time do you have to decide about England?" Michael finally asked. "Until Friday," Laura replied, checking the clock on the wall. "That is less than 48 hours. Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that Laura had already learned to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I don't want to influence your decision," he began carefully. "I know how much this opportunity means to you, but I also know how much you mean to us," he completed, his voice loaded with emotion. "Sophie loves you, and I—" Laura's phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Mrs. Marlene. "Laura, dear," the coordinator's voice sounded concerned. "I just received a very unpleasant visit from Mrs. Rebecca Allen. She's threatening to create problems for the Institute if we don't remove you from Sophie's case." Laura felt her blood freeze. "And she can't do that." "Technically, no, but she has influence, contacts. The Institute depends on donations, you know." "I understand," Laura replied, feeling the tears return. "I'll do what's best for the Institute." When she hung up, Michael was looking at her with concern. "What happened?" Laura explained the situation, her hands trembling slightly. Maybe it's a sign. Maybe England is really the best option." "No," Michael declared with surprising firmness. "I won't let fear and threats decide our lives, not again." He picked up his own phone and dialed a number. "Rebecca, we need to talk. Now." Half an hour later, Rebecca Allen entered the apartment, her rigid posture contrasting with the welcoming atmosphere of the place. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Laura. "What is she doing here?" she asked acidly. "She's here because she's part of our family now," Michael replied calmly. "Sophie had a fever today. Do you know who dropped everything and ran to be with her, Laura? Do you know who spends hours inventing stories to make your granddaughter smile again?" "Laura." "Michael, don't be naive." "No, Rebecca. Enough." He interrupted her. "I know you're suffering. I know you miss Helen. We all do. But I can't allow your pain to hurt innocent people." Rebecca let herself fall onto the sofa, suddenly looking very tired. "She was my only daughter," she murmured. "And she always will be," Laura spoke for the first time, her voice gentle. "Nobody can change that, nor wants to. The love that Sophie and Michael have for Helen is part of who they are. I just want to help them find joy again." Rebecca looked at her for a long time, as if seeing her for real for the first time. "Helen used to say that true love is recognized in small gestures," she finally said. "In the way of drying a tear, telling a story, holding a feverish hand." A sob escaped from her chest. She wrote that in her diary. "I never really understood what it meant. Until now." Laura felt Michael approach, his solid and comforting presence beside her. "Rebecca," he spoke softly, "we're not trying to replace Helen. We're just learning to live again, as she would have wanted." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was no longer loaded with accusations and grudges, but with nascent understanding, with possibilities. "Auntie Becky?" A sleepy little voice called from the bedroom door. Sophie was standing, still pale but with more alert eyes. Rebecca quickly got up, going to her granddaughter, but before she reached her, Sophie had already run to Laura, hugging her legs. "You're still here," the girl smiled. "I thought it had been a dream." The next morning dawned with a different clarity in the Davis penthouse. Sophie had spent the night without fever, sleeping peacefully under the alternating care of Laura and Michael. Rebecca, after long hours of conversation and contained tears, ended up falling asleep in the guest room, as if her body and soul needed that moment of pause to process all the emotions. Laura woke up on the living room sofa, covered by a soft blanket that she didn't remember taking. The sun came through the huge windows, creating golden reflections on the wooden floor. In the kitchen, she could hear low voices and the clinking of cups. "But you promise you won't tell Laura?" Sophie's voice whispered, barely containing the excitement. "I promise, Princess," Michael replied with equal confidentiality. "It will be our special surprise." Laura smiled, pretending to still be asleep when she heard little footsteps approaching. Sophie was trying to walk on tiptoe, carrying something that rustled slightly. "Is she still sleeping?" the girl asked. In a not at all discreet whisper. "I think so," Michael replied, and Laura could hear the smile in his voice. "Do you want to wake her up?" Sophie didn't need a second invitation. Laura felt small fingers gently touch her face. "Laura, wake up! We made a surprise for you." Slowly opening her eyes, Laura was met with Sophie's radiant face, holding a large envelope decorated with colorful stars. Michael was right behind, holding a tray with breakfast, his face showing a mixture of anxiety and hope. "What is this?" Laura asked, sitting up on the sofa. "Open it," Sophie exclaimed, practically jumping with excitement. Carefully, Laura opened the envelope. Inside were several drawings, all made by Sophie, but they weren't ordinary drawings. They were portraits of the family she imagined: Laura, Michael, herself, and, surprisingly, Helen, represented as a bright star in the sky. "See," Sophie explained, pointing to the drawings. "Mommy is our guardian star, like in your story, and you are our earth angel, like in her diary." Laura felt tears beginning to form. "Sophie, this is—" "There's more," Michael gently intervened, sitting beside them and placing the tray on the coffee table. From the bottom of the envelope, Sophie pulled out a different paper. It was a letter written in the irregular handwriting of a child who is learning to write. "Dear Laura, Grandma Becky told me that you might go away to a place very far away. But you can't go because then who will tell me star stories? Who will make Daddy smile in that nice way? Who will hug me when I have a fever? Mommy is our star in the sky, but you are our angel here on earth. Please stay. I promise I'll be the best daughter in the world for you too. With love, Sophie." Laura could no longer contain her tears. She pulled Sophie into a tight hug, feeling love overflowing in her chest. "I helped her write it," a voice came from the kitchen door. Rebecca was there, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her eyes also teary. "And every word is true." Michael took Laura's hand in his. "We're not asking you to give up your dreams," he said softly. "We're asking you to allow us to be part of them." "What do you mean?" Laura asked, wiping away her tears. "Digitech has a branch in England," Michael explained. "I've been thinking about expanding the business there for some time, and Sophie has always wanted to learn a new language." "Michael, I can't let you change your whole life because of me." "It's not because of you," he smiled. "It's because of us. All of us. A family doesn't need to follow a traditional model to be true. Helen knew that. Now we know it too." Rebecca approached, sitting in the nearby armchair. "It took me time to understand," she admitted. "But yesterday, seeing you care for my granddaughter, telling stories until she fell asleep, I realized that love doesn't diminish when it's divided. It multiplies." Sophie, still hugging Laura, raised her hopeful face. "So will you stay? Or will we go together?" Laura looked at each face around her. Sophie, with her innocence and unconditional love, Michael with his eyes full of silent promises, Rebecca with her newly discovered acceptance. She thought of her brother Lucas, how he always said that a true home isn't a place, but the people with whom we choose to share our journey. The Rainbow Institute was especially busy that afternoon. Mrs. Marlene had gathered all the children and educators in the courtyard for a special announcement. Laura was at her side, her hands nervously intertwined, while Michael and Sophie discreetly waited in a corner. "Dear ones," Mrs. Marlene began, her voice carrying that affectionate authority that characterized her, "I have two important announcements to share today. The first is that our dear Laura has been accepted for a master's program in England." A murmur of surprise and sadness ran through the courtyard. Some children were already starting to cry. "But," Mrs. Marlene continued, raising her hand to ask for silence, "that's not the only news. The Rainbow Institute is going to open a branch in England." The murmurs turned into exclamations of surprise. Laura took a step forward, her heart beating fast. "Thanks to a partnership with Digitech," she explained, smiling at Michael, "we'll be able to take our work to other children in another country. And the best part, some of you will be able to visit us during vacations." The explosion of joy was instantaneous. The children jumped and shouted, some running to hug Laura. Sophie left her corner and joined the celebration, her eyes shining with happiness. Later, after the excitement had diminished, Laura found herself in her office organizing her belongings. Photos, drawings, small mementos of years of work and love dedicated to that place. A gentle knock on the door made her turn around. "Monsieur." "I come in?" Rebecca asked, carrying an old box in her hands. "Of course," Laura replied, surprised by the unexpected visit. Rebecca carefully placed the box on the table. "I found this yesterday after I went back home. These are Helen's things, from when she also worked with children before." Her voice faltered a bit, but she continued, "I thought you might like to have it, to use in the new institute, to keep a little piece of her alive there too." Laura opened the box with reverence. Inside were children's books, handcrafted puppets, and a planning notebook full of notes and ideas written in Helen's neat handwriting. "Rebecca, this is, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," the older woman smiled, her eyes shining with contained tears. "Just promise you'll take good care of my family, of our family." The two women hugged, years of distrust and hurt dissolving in that simple gesture. A noise at the door made them separate. Michael was there with Sophie in his arms. "Is everything okay here?" he asked softly. "Better than ever," Rebecca replied, discreetly wiping her eyes. "I was just delivering a welcome to the family gift." Sophie jumped from her father's arms and ran to examine the box. "Look, Dad, there's a book. Of star stories here too?" "Your mother loved that book," Rebecca commented, caressing the worn cover. "She used to say that stars are like love. Even when we can't see them, we know they're there." Michael approached, hugging Laura from behind, as he watched his daughter explore the treasures in the box with Rebecca. It was a scene he had never imagined possible a few weeks ago. His mother-in-law and his Laura, sharing memories and smiles. "What are you thinking about?" Laura asked softly, leaning back against him. "About how surprising life is," he replied. "About how sometimes we need to lose our footing to learn how to fly." "Poetic," she smiled. "You've been hanging around me too much. And I intend to hang around much more," he whispered in her ear. "In England, in the United States, wherever life takes us." Sophie raised one of the puppets from the box, her eyes shining with that pure child's joy. "Laura, are we taking all of them? Can we tell stories to the children there too?" "Of course we will, my love," Laura replied, feeling her heart overflow with love. "We'll create new stories together, and this time they'll all have happy endings." The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparations and emotions. The Davis penthouse, once so organized and minimalist, was now filled with boxes, papers, and the sweet mess that precedes big changes. Sophie had transformed her room into a veritable command center, with colorful lists of what she needed to take and drawings of how she imagined her new life in England. Laura divided her time between the Rainbow Institute and organizing the new English branch. On a particularly busy afternoon, while reviewing documents in her office, she received an unexpected visit. "Excuse me," a familiar voice called from the door. It was Claire, Michael's assistant, carrying a thick folder. "Mr. Davis asked me to deliver this to you." Intrigued, Laura opened the folder. Inside were architectural plans, contracts, and to her surprise, a deed. The new Rainbow Institute in England would be built next to a historic mansion, which, according to the documents, would be their new residence. He wanted to surprise you, Claire smiled, sitting down when Laura invited her. You know, I've never seen Mr. Davis like this. Before he was different, immersed in work, always serious, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Laura blushed slightly, leafing through the documents without really seeing them. He's an amazing man. It's more than that, Claire continued, her tone changing to something more personal. You brought light back to that family. Everyone in the company notices. Even the meetings are different. He smiles more, listens more, seems more alive. A sound of laughter interrupted the conversation. Sophie was running down the hallway, followed by Rebecca, who was carrying several shopping bags. Laura! Laura! The girl entered the office like a hurricane. Look what Grandma bought for us. They're matching clothes for our first week in England. Rebecca entered right after, looking slightly out of breath but happy. I thought it would be a special way to start this new phase, she explained, spreading the bags on the floor. There's something for you too, Claire. After all, you'll visit us, right? Claire widened her eyes, surprised to be included in the family plans. Well, I won't accept no as an answer, Rebecca declared with that characteristic authority of the Allens. I've already reserved your room in the mansion for the December holidays. Laura watched the scene with an overflowing heart. It was amazing how in such a short time their lives had intertwined in such a natural and profound way. Rebecca, who before saw her as a threat, was now buying matching clothes for them. Claire, the efficient assistant, had become part of that expanded family. Look, this is for you, Sophie exclaimed, pulling a sky blue dress from one of the bags. It matches your eyes. Daddy always says your eyes look like the spring sky. Laura took the dress, feeling the delicacy of the fabric between her fingers. He said that, did he? He said much more, Rebecca commented with a mischievous smile. The other day I caught him writing poetry. Poetry, Michael Davis, the king of technology, writing love verses like a teenager. They all laughed, including Claire, who seemed increasingly at ease in that family atmosphere. And speaking of the king of technology, Rebecca continued, checking her watch, shouldn't we be heading to the restaurant? Michael must be waiting for us. Laura had almost forgotten. It was the Institute's farewell dinner. The entire team would be there, along with some of the children's families, to celebrate not a goodbye but a see you soon. I need to stop by home first, Laura said, starting to organize her things. I have a special gift to deliver today. What gift? Sophie asked curiously. It's a surprise, Laura winked at her, but it involves stars, constellations, and a very special story about how different types of love can illuminate our paths. Rebecca approached, helping to organize the documents on the table. Her eyes fell on the photo of Lucas that Laura always kept nearby. He would be proud, she said softly, to see his little sister building her own family constellation. Laura felt tears forming, but this time they were tears of gratitude. Sometimes, she replied, I think he helped guide all of us here, along with Helen. Sophie, who had approached, silently hugged her waist. Now we have even more guardian stars looking after us, don't we? Laura hugged her back, exchanging an emotional look with Rebecca. Yes, my love, and you know what's most special? These stars never stop shining no matter what country we're in. The restaurant was decorated with small lights that resembled stars, a surprise organized by Mrs. Marlene. When Laura arrived with Sophie, Rebecca, and Claire, the environment was already filled with familiar faces and animated conversations. Michael waited for them at the entrance, elegant in his navy blue suit, but with that new sparkle in his eyes that made him look younger, lighter. Seeing Laura in the sky blue dress, his smile lit up in a way that didn't go unnoticed by anyone. You look beautiful, he whispered, kissing her softly. Dad. Sophie tugged at his sleeve, anxious. Laura has a surprise for us. Really? He raised an eyebrow, curious. I thought I was the one with a surprise today. Laura laughed, adjusting the bag where she kept her special gift. How about we save the surprises for after dinner? The hall was organized with several round tables, each decorated with small flower arrangements and candles. On one wall, a panel had been mounted with photos from the Institute's last years, frozen moments of laughter, hugs, and small daily achievements. Mrs. Marlene went up to the small improvised stage, asking for everyone's attention. "Dear Rainbow family," she began, her voice choked with emotion. "We are here today not to say goodbye, but to celebrate a new beginning. A beginning that reminds us that true love knows no boundaries." She paused, her eyes finding Laura in the crowd. "When a young educator arrived at our institute 5 years ago, bringing in her eyes the pain of profound losses, but also an incredible strength to start over, I knew she would be special. What I didn't imagine was how much she would transform not only the lives of our children, but all of us." Laura felt Michael squeeze her hand under the table while Sophie nestled closer to her. "And now," Mrs. Marlene continued, "that same educator teaches us another valuable lesson, that family is who we choose to love, that new beginnings can be scary but also wonderful, and that sometimes we need to cross an ocean to find our true home." Michael then stood up, surprising everyone. "If you'll allow me," he said, his voice strong but gentle, "I'd like to make an announcement." He took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. "The Rainbow Institute will not just be a branch in England. We are creating an international foundation which will allow more children to have access to quality education and unconditional love. And I would like to invite Mrs. Marlene to be the president of this foundation." The surprise and joy on Mrs. Marlene's face were indescribable. Applause exploded throughout the hall. "Now," Laura stood up too, "I think it's my turn." She opened her bag and took out a beautifully bound book. "This is a gift for all of us," she explained. "In the last few months, with the special help of a little artist," she smiled at Sophie, "I created a storybook. Stories about different types of love, about losses and new beginnings, about stars that guide us and angels that appear when we need them most." She opened the book, showing the illustrations, a mixture of Sophie's drawings with professional art. And the most special part, each child at the Institute will receive a copy so they never forget that true love can have many forms, many colors, many stories. Sophie jumped from her chair, running to hug Laura. "You used my drawings, my stars." "Of course I used them," Laura smiled, bending down to be at the girl's height. "Because you, my love, taught me that the most beautiful constellations are those we create with our hearts." Michael joined the hug, and soon Rebecca too. Mrs. Marlene watched the scene with tears in her eyes while Claire discreetly took photos with her cell phone. "There's a special dedication," Laura continued, her voice soft but clear in the emotional silence that formed. "To Helen and Lucas, our guardian stars, who taught us that true love never ends. It just transforms into light to illuminate new paths." The last day in New York dawned with a fine rain, the kind that seems more like a curtain of tears from the sky. Laura woke up early in her small apartment, now practically empty except for a few boxes and memories that didn't fit in physical containers. Sitting on the windowsill, she watched the city wake up while holding her now cold cup of coffee. Her cell phone vibrated with a message from Michael. "Are you ready for today?" Before she could respond, another message arrived, this time from Rebecca. "Dear, I stopped by your building earlier and left something at the front desk. Please pick it up before you leave." Intrigued, Laura went down to the front desk. The doorman handed her a package delicately wrapped in golden paper. Inside, she found an old photo album and a note written in Rebecca's elegant handwriting. "Laura, this album contains memories of Helen's first years as a teacher. I thought you might like to have it, not just as a memento but as inspiration for your own journey. She always said that teaching is an act of love that transcends time. With affection, Rebecca." Laura carefully leafed through the album. In the photos yellowed by time, a young Helen smiled, surrounded by children, her eyes shining with the same passion for teaching that Laura recognized in herself. A knock on the door surprised her. It was Mrs. Marlene carrying a breakfast basket. I couldn't let you spend this morning alone, the lady explained, entering and beginning to arrange the small kitchen table. Besides, we need to talk about the final details of the foundation. As they shared coffee and warm bread, Mrs. Marlene took some documents from her purse. Look at these resumes. They're English educators interested in working at the new institute. I thought you might want to participate in the selection process. Laura examined the papers, but her mind wandered to other concerns. Mrs. Marlene, what if I'm not good enough? If I can't balance the master's program, the institute, and, well, my new family? The lady took her hands in hers, as she had done so many times in the last 5 years. Dear, you're already doing it. Every story you tell, every smile you provoke, every life you touch. That's balance, that's love in action. The phone rang again. It was Sophie using her father's cell phone. Laura, you won't believe it. Daddy, let me paint a wall in my new room in England. I'm going to make a sky full of stars just like your stories. Laura laughed, feeling her heart warm. That's wonderful, love, but where's your dad? He's trying to convince Grandma not to take all my princess clothes, Sophie replied with a dramatic sigh. She says English princesses dress differently. Mrs. Marlene watched Laura with a knowing smile. You know, she commented after the call ended, in all these years at the Institute, I've never seen such a beautiful transformation as yours. You arrived here broken, but instead of closing yourself off, you chose to transform your pain into love. Laura looked out the window, where the rain was now giving way to a timid sun. Lucas always said that people are like stars. Sometimes they need darkness to shine brighter. And Helen wrote something similar in her diary, Mrs. Marlene added, leafing through the album Rebecca had sent. Look at this photo. She was pregnant with Sophie here. In the image, Helen rested her hands on her belly while reading to a group of children. Her face radiated that serene joy of someone who has found their place in the world. Did you know? It was she who started the Star Stories project at the Institute. Mrs. Marlene revealed. She believed that each child carries a special light inside them. They just need someone to help that light shine. Laura felt silent tears running down her face. It was as if all the invisible threads of destiny finally made sense, as if Helen and Lucas had somehow guided all of them there. A new message from Michael lit up her phone. Sophie finally agreed to leave half of her princess wardrobe in the United States. Rebecca is inconsolable. I need reinforcements. Dinner at the penthouse tonight. Last night in New York deserves something special. Laura smiled, quickly responding, Of course, I have a surprise for you too. Night fell over New York like a velvet cloak dotted with lights. In the Davis penthouse, Michael had transformed the terrace into a garden of dreams. Small, decorative, lights intertwined with natural flowers, creating the illusion that the stars had come closer. Laura arrived carrying a mysterious box, being greeted by an extremely excited Sophie in her unicorn pajamas. One of the pieces Rebecca had managed to save from the great moving selection. Finally, the girl exclaimed, pulling Laura by the hand. Daddy wouldn't let us have dinner until you arrived. He said he had something important to say. Michael appeared at the penthouse door, casual in a light blue shirt and dark pants. His smile upon seeing Laura carried that unique mixture of love and admiration that made her heart race. Welcome home, he whispered, kissing her softly. Home, Laura repeated, savoring how differently the word sounded now. I like how that sounds. Rebecca emerged from the kitchen carrying a dish that exuded a delicious aroma. I made that lasagna that Helen loved so much, she announced. I thought it would be appropriate for our last night here. They sat at the terrace table under the starry New York sky. The conversation flowed naturally, interspersed with laughter and plans for the future. Sophie animatedly told how she planned to decorate her new room, while Rebecca shared tips on English cuisine she had researched. Before dinner, Michael said, standing up, there's something I'd like to do. He took a small box from his pocket and knelt beside Laura, who felt her heart stop for a moment. It's not a marriage proposal, he smiled, noticing her expression. Not yet. It's a promise. He opened the box, revealing 3 delicate rings, each with a small star. One for each of us, he explained, looking at Sophie. A promise that no matter where we are, we'll always be a family. A unique constellation. Laura felt tears begin to fall as Michael placed one of the rings on her finger. Sophie jumped from her chair, eager to receive hers. "Now it's my turn," Laura said, wiping away tears and picking up the box she had brought. "This is my promise to our family." Inside the box was a portable telescope and a beautifully handcrafted bound book. "The telescope," she explained, "is so we never forget to look at the stars, no matter what country we're in. And the book." She opened the book, revealing blank pages except for the first one, where she had written, "To my new family. This will be our adventure diary. Like Helen did, we'll record each special moment, each discovery, each smile. And one day, when other people read it, they'll understand that true love has no borders, no rules, no limits." "With all my heart, Laura." Rebecca, who had been unusually quiet, stood up and went to the sideboard, returning with a special bottle of wine. "Helen kept this bottle for a unique occasion," she revealed. "I think today is that day." While Rebecca served the wine, Michael helped Sophie point the telescope at the sky, teaching her to identify the constellations. "Look, Laura," Sophie called excitedly. "You can see the guardian star from here." Laura approached, hugging the girl from behind. "And you know what's most special? In England, we'll be able to see the same stars. They'll accompany us on the journey." "Like Mommy?" Sophie asked softly. "Exactly like Mommy," Michael replied, enveloping the two in his arms. "And like Uncle Lucas." Rebecca raised her glass in a silent toast, her eyes shining with contained tears. The wine that Helen had kept now served to celebrate not an end, but a new beginning. Laura looked at the ring on her finger, the small star catching the glow of the terrace lights. It wasn't just a jewel, it was a symbol that sometimes destiny has much bigger plans than we can imagine. The international airport buzzed with activity that sunny morning. Laura watched Sophie hopping between the suitcases, her small telescope firmly held against her chest, while Michael took care of the last check-in details. "Don't forget to water my plants," Sophie energetically instructed Mrs. Marlene, who had insisted on accompanying them to boarding. "And send pictures of them every day." "Don't worry, little astronomer," Mrs. Marlene smiled, adjusting the bow in the girl's hair. "And you don't forget to tell me all the new constellations you discover in England." Rebecca arrived hurriedly, carrying a bag that seemed about to burst. "I'm glad I made it in time. Sophie, dear, I found a few more dresses you need to take." "Rebecca," Michael gently intervened, "we're already over the baggage allowance. But it's just 3 more. And there's that blue one that matches Laura's eyes and—" "Mom," a soft voice interrupted. Everyone turned, surprised. Claire, Michael's assistant, had arrived silently and was now smiling at Rebecca. The word had escaped naturally, a reflection of the last few weeks when Rebecca had practically adopted the young assistant. Rebecca paused, her eyes welling up. She dropped the bag and hugged Claire tightly. "Take good care of the office, daughter. And don't forget you have a room waiting for you in England at Christmas." Laura watched the scene with a full heart. It was amazing how love had the power to expand families, to create new bonds where before there was only loneliness. "Attention passengers of Flight 247 to London, please proceed to the boarding gate." The announcement brought everyone back to the reality of the moment. It was time for goodbyes. "Before we go," Laura said, taking 3 envelopes from her purse, "I have something for you." She handed one envelope to Mrs. Marlene, another to Rebecca, and the third to Claire. "Only open them when we arrive in England." Sophie, who had approached curiously, frowned. "What's inside?" "A special story for each of them," Laura explained, winking at the girl. "About how sometimes we need to leave some stars behind to discover new constellations." The tears which everyone had tried to contain until that moment finally began to fall. The hugs multiplied, words of affection mixing with promises of reunion. "Remember what we agreed on?" Mrs. Marlene whispered in Laura's ear during their hug. "You're not leaving anything behind, you're just expanding your sky." Michael approached Rebecca, who was adjusting Sophie's coat for the 10th time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for understanding, for accepting, for loving." Rebecca held her son-in-law's face between her hands, as she used to do when he was still dating Helen. "Take good care of them, all of them, and don't forget to send pictures of Sophie's first day at the English school." Claire was the last to say goodbye, handing Michael a folder with all the documents meticulously organized. "The foundation contracts have already been signed," she informed professionally before her tone softened, "and I've already booked my ticket for Christmas." When they finally began walking toward the boarding gate, Sophie looked back one last time. Rebecca, Mrs. Marlene, and Claire were side by side waving. 3 generations of women united by love for a family that had transformed and grown in unexpected ways. "Laura," Sophie called softly, holding her hand as they walked, "do you think we can see the same stars from England?" Laura exchanged a knowing look with Michael before answering. "Of course we can, my love. In fact, I think we'll discover that the sky is much bigger than we imagined." Michael put his arm around Laura's shoulders, pulling her close as they walked down the airport corridor. The ring with the small star shone on her finger, reflecting the sunlight that came through the huge windows. The flight went smoothly, with Sophie alternating between naps and animated drawing sessions in her new adventure diary. Michael took the opportunity to review some documents for the new institute, while Laura finalized the last details of the pedagogical project she would present in her first week of the master's program. When the pilot announced they were flying, over London, the sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. Sophie pressed her face against the window, her eyes wide with admiration. "Look, Dad, the sky looks like it's on fire." "It's our first English sunset," Michael smiled, putting away his papers. "A good omen, don't you think?" Laura observed the approaching city, her heart beating faster with the mixture of anxiety and expectation. The decision to start over in a new country seemed even more real now, looking at that unfamiliar landscape that would soon be her home. After landing and passing through immigration, they found a driver holding a sign with their names. Michael had organized everything to make their arrival as comfortable as possible. "Let's go home first," he announced, helping the driver with the luggage. "I have a surprise waiting for you." The journey from the airport to the historic mansion that would be their new residence was punctuated by Sophie's enthusiastic comments about every detail of the city passing by the car window. Laura smiled, enchanted by the way the girl transformed each novelty into an adventure. When they finally arrived at the address, Laura couldn't contain an exclamation of surprise. The mansion was even more beautiful than in the photos, with its traditional English architecture preserved and a garden that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. "Welcome to our new home," Michael said, opening the ornate iron gate. But the real surprise was inside. As they opened the door, they were greeted by a soft melody coming from an old piano in the main hall. Sitting at the instrument was a gray-haired lady with a gentle smile. "Laura, Sophie," Michael introduced. "This is Mrs. Beatrice, our neighbor, and coincidentally, one of England's leading specialists in early childhood education." Mrs. Beatrice rose from the piano, approaching with open arms. "I finally meet the family that brought light back to this house," she said in English with a London accent. "Did you know that this mansion was once a school for orphaned children in the last century?" Sophie, who had already approached the piano, delicately touching the keys, turned with interest. "Really? Were there other children here?" "Many," Mrs. Beatrice smiled. "And now, with the new institute being built next door, there will be again. It's as if destiny had planned everything, don't you think?" Laura felt tears of emotion forming. Michael had thought of every detail, every connection. The mansion wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of continuity, of renewed purpose. "Come," Mrs. Beatrice called, taking Sophie by the hand. "I left something special prepared in the kitchen, a traditional English welcome recipe." As they followed the lady down the hallway, Laura noticed the walls. Michael had some of the photos they brought from the United States hung, Helen smiling, Lucas in his teens, moments from the Rainbow Institute. But there were also empty spaces, waiting to be filled with new memories. In the spacious kitchen, a table was set with typical English treats. Sophie immediately became interested in a dessert covered with cinnamon, while Mrs. Beatrice served tea in antique porcelain cups. "Did you know that the stars look different from here?" the lady casually commented, noticing the telescope Sophie was still carrying. "I have a small observatory in the back garden. My late husband was an astronomer." Sophie's eyes sparkled. "Can we see? Please, please." "Of course you can," Mrs. Beatrice smiled. "In fact, I thought we could make it a tradition. Every Friday after institute classes, we can have a special stargazing session. What do you think?" Laura watched the interaction with an overflowing heart. It was as if each piece of the puzzle was fitting perfectly, as if each step they had taken had led them exactly where they needed to be. The following months passed like pages of a magical book being turned by the wind. The institute, next to the mansion, was taking shape rapidly, its walls gaining colors and life. Laura divided her time between master's classes and supervising the construction, while Michael balanced managing Digitech with his new role as president of the International Rainbow Foundation. On a particularly special afternoon, the eve of the new institute's inauguration, Laura found Sophie in the garden observatory, bent over Mrs. Beatrice's telescope. The girl had become a small amateur astronomer, knowing each constellation visible in the English sky like old friends. "Laura," Sophie called excitedly, "come see. I found that star Grandma Rebecca talked about." Laura approached, smiling to see the girl's enthusiasm. Rebecca, who had arrived the week before for the inauguration, was spending hours with her granddaughter, sharing not only stories about Helen, but also creating new memories together. "You know what Grandma told me?" Sophie continued, adjusting the telescope. "That when Mummy was little, she also loved stars. She even had a special notebook where she drew all the constellations she saw." "Really?" Laura asked softly, sitting beside the girl. "Uh-huh. And Grandma brought the notebook for me. Look." Sophie ran into the house, returning moments later with an old, worn notebook. On the yellowed pages, childish drawings of stars mixed with careful notes about their positions in the sky. "Mummy wrote here that each person has their own constellation," Sophie read, her fingers tracing the words written so many years ago. "That when we love someone, it's like a new star appears in our sky." Laura felt her heart tighten with emotion. "And do you agree with her?" "Yes," Sophie promptly replied. "Look, there's Mummy's star, which is the brightest. There's Daddy's, which is that strong blue one there. Yours, which is that one with different colors. Grandma Rebecca's, which twinkles as if it's winking at us. Mrs. Beatrice's, which is all golden." As Sophie continued listing the stars of her personal constellation, Laura noticed Michael standing at the observatory door, watching them with a soft smile on his face. "Dinner time, my astronomers," he gently announced. Mrs. Beatrice prepared that special soup of hers. "Just one more minute, Dad," Sophie pleaded. "I need to show Laura the surprise I prepared for the institute." "Surprise?" Laura asked curiously. Sophie ran to a shelf and picked up a large roll of paper. Unrolling it, she revealed a beautifully decorated mural with constellations and stars. "It's for the first day of class," she explained proudly. "So all the new children know they can have their own constellations too, that no matter where they come from or if they've lost someone, there's always room for more stars in the sky." Laura felt tears running down her face as she hugged Sophie. Michael joined them, enveloping the two in his arms. "And there's one more thing," Sophie continued, her voice softer now. "I made a special drawing of our family. Look, in the center of the mural there was a unique constellation, 5 stars forming a heart. Underneath, Sophie had written in her childish handwriting, 'Family is like a constellation. Each star shines in its own way, but together they form something even more beautiful.' I put 5 stars," she explained. "One for me, one for Dad, one for you, one for Mommy up in the sky, and one for Uncle Lucas. This way they're also part of our new story." Michael kissed the top of his daughter's head, his eyes shining with emotion. "It's perfect, Princess, absolutely perfect." The sound of the piano coming from the main house caught their attention. Mrs. Beatrice was playing the music she had composed especially for the Institute's inauguration. "Shall we?" Michael extended, his hands to his 2 earthly stars. Dinner is waiting, and tomorrow we begin a new chapter. As they walked back to the house, Laura looked one last time at the English sky, so different and yet so familiar as the American sky. The stars twinkled as if they agreed. Sometimes the true miracle is not in finding your place in the world, but in creating a place where everyone can shine together. The morning of the Rainbow Institute's inauguration in London dawned with an exceptionally blue sky. The historic mansion and the new institute building were decorated with colourful ribbons and balloons, while a large panel with Sophie's mural occupied a prominent place at the entrance. Families began to arrive, bringing anxious and curious children. Mrs. Beatrice, elegant in a navy blue dress, received the guests with her characteristic grace. Rebecca circulated among those present, proudly introducing her granddaughter to everyone she met. Laura observed everything from the window of her new office, her heart beating strongly with the emotion of the moment. She wore the sky-blue dress Rebecca had given her, and the ring with the small star shone on her finger. "Nervous?" Michael's voice sounded soft behind her. He approached, hugging her by the waist. "A little," she admitted. "It's as if all the paths of my life had brought me here." Before Michael could respond, Sophie burst through the door, beautiful in her new dress carrying a mysterious box. "Laura, Dad, look what arrived from the United States." Inside the box were several letters, one from each child at the Rainbow Institute in New York. Next to it, a tablet displayed a live video call with Mrs. Marlene and Claire. "Surprise!" Mrs. Marlene smiled through the screen. "Did you really think we wouldn't be present at this special moment?" Claire appeared beside her, holding an envelope. "The children spent the whole week writing these letters. And there's one more surprise." She opened the envelope, revealing a photograph of the night sky in New York. "We took this photo last night at exactly the same moment you were observing the stars there. Same sky, same love, just seen from different places." Laura felt tears beginning to fall. Michael gently squeezed her hand while Sophie jumped excitedly. "It's time." Mrs. Beatrice appeared at the door. "Everyone is waiting." In the Institute's courtyard, dozens of expectant faces turned to the small improvised stage. Laura went up, trembling slightly, with Michael and Sophie at her side. "Welcome to the Rainbow Institute of London," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Today we're not just inaugurating a building, we're inaugurating a dream. A dream that began in the United States, grew across the ocean, and now gains new colors in England." She paused, looking at the faces of the children present. "Someone very special once wrote that each person has their own constellation, that when we love someone, it's as if a new star appears in our sky. Today, we want to invite each of you to be part of this great constellation we're creating together." Sophie stepped forward, pointing to her mural. "And look, I've already left space for all your stars." The soft laughter that ran through the audience turned into warm applause. Michael took the microphone. 2 years ago, I was a man who had lost his direction, but destiny, in its infinite wisdom, put in my path a special educator who not only helped my daughter smile again, but taught me that true love has the power to create new constellations." Rebecca approached the stage, her eyes shining with contained tears. "And today," she completed, "Helen must be smiling from her star, seeing how her family has grown, transformed and found new reasons to shine." Laura looked at the blue London sky, then at the tablet screen where Mrs. Marlene and Claire smiled, and finally at her family, Michael, Sophie, Rebecca, Mrs. Beatrice. Each face represented a different chapter of her story, a unique star in her personal constellation. "May this institute be more than a place of learning," she concluded. "May it be a place where each child can discover their own shine, where each sad story can find a new happy ending, where love can always create new constellations." Sophie ran to the center of the stage, raising her telescope like a magic wand. And they lived happily ever after. But this is just the first page of our new story. The applause that followed seemed to make the sky itself vibrate. Laura, wrapped in the arms of her family, finally understood. Sometimes destiny takes us on unexpected paths, not to lose us, but to help us find where we truly belong. And so, under the blue, London sky, a new story began to be written, not just for Laura, Michael and Sophie, but for all the stars that were yet to shine in their ever-expanding constellation.